Hello everyone, and today we are going to be creating a JSON configuration, sort of a database for role-playing items, say that you want to add descriptions to and effects and things of that nature. So let's get started. Okay, I have this roguelike items sprite sheet that we used in the last video, and I've renamed all of the sprites to appropriate names, and I've used the sprite renamer that we made in the last 3 or 4 videos, and I'll link the sprite video if you want to watch out how to do that. I'll link that here. So I have all of these items, and I want to add descriptions and maybe effects and maybe attributes to these items. But how do I do that? I've got a bunch. There's a bunch of items here. It's like 181 objects. So if I wanted to do that, there are different options we have, but really the easiest one I see, the easiest couple that I see would be to create an XML file, since C# can, there are built-in libraries for that, or to do it with JSON. And honestly, nowadays I prefer JSON just because it's easier to read. But creating a JSON file with 180, what was it, 182 or 181 entries, that seems like a very daunting task. So let's see if we can't speed that up. So what we can do, and often I guess people might, sometimes you might ignore this kind of thing, but we'll write a little bit of code so that we can basically generate a JSON file for us, and then we can fill in the pieces such as a description and things like that. So what we need first would, I would call it maybe a data folder, and then we could come up here and we could create a C# script and call it item data. And in that item data we would put, it doesn't have to be, well, we know something else that we could do is we could make a bunch of scriptable objects, but we would still have to do a lot of this stuff manually, and 181 things is a lot. We could still do that even after we do this, but this is going to be a nice way to pull this stuff in pretty quickly. So we don't need it to be a mono behavior at all. We do need it to be serializable. So we'll go ahead and stick that attribute on the front of this thing. And so now all we need to do is figure out what we want to put, what kind of data. Well, of course, a name would be great. And how about a description? And we'll just come up with some other things, just some things to, and they may not apply to everything. So let's say armor, and maybe a attack mod, and we'll call this armor mod. So I think, oh, and one other thing, let's bring in the image name. So we want the name of the actual sprite slice that we want this item to use. And then we can later on do something like protected image, and that's going to be in Unity UI. So if we want to actually display the image of the item, we can call this item image, and we'll get to that. We can get to that a little bit later, and we can just go ahead and stick a constructor in here for now. Okay, so now we have an item data class. Now the next thing that we'll want to do is we want to grab the sprite slices from our texture here. So since we want to load these images at runtime, because our, well, I'll call it a database, but configuration file, however you want to refer to it, since it's going to refer to these images at runtime, we want to have this in a place where we can load these at runtime and insert them into our set, or our database, if you want to call it a database, which it pretty much is. We'll create a folder and we'll call it resources, our standard resources folder. and I will create another folder under there, and we'll call it GFX for graphics, and I'm going to move the roguelike items under there, and I'm going to rename it. I'm going to rename it to items. Okay, so we want an additional script, and we'll just call it create JSON script. So again, we're just going to write sort of a specific tool to do this real quick. So what we're gonna do is we want to get all the sprites out of this items texture, all of the sub sprites out of it. A way to do that, we'll just call it images, and we can do the following. We can use the resources class, and we can say load all, and I want to load all sprites, and then you have to give it a path to where the resources are, and that's going to be graphics/items, and oops, and that's supposed to be sprite. And you do not add the file extension, so there's no file extension. And then okay, so what we're going to do then is we will attach this. Actually, first, well, we'll attach it. We're going to debug it. And let's come in here to Unity, and we'll add a new. We'll create a new game object, and I just hit Control-Shift-N to do that. It's a nice, simple shortcut. I'm going to add the create JSON script here, and then we'll run it, and then we'll watch this breakpoint be caught. We'll step through it, and then we'll take a look at the images, and look, we have 181 of them, and they are indeed the sprites that we want. So we can successfully acquire all of those sprites. And now something else we're going to do. What we're going to do is we're going to use the JSON utility, and we're going to say to JSON, and we're going to have that. We're going to make an object that's going to be basically a big list of item datas. But in order to do that, with Unity's JSON utility, we need another class. So we'll just call it, for now we'll just call it data, and that class needs to be serializable. And then we can say public, and we'll put a list of item data in there, and we'll just call it we'll just call it items. And you have to do that. You can't, for the, at least for now, at least in the version that I'm using, JSON utility will not serialize a list or an array directly to and from a file without an enclosing class. So that's what we're doing there. No problem. So we will create a data object, and we'll say that's a new data, and then we'll go ahead and just do this. That makes it nice and easy. So now we have a data object. We've loaded all the images, and now all we have to do is say for each sprite in images, we can say we want a new item equals new item data, and we probably should have some kind of constructor that says string name. You can say this dot name equals name, etc., and maybe a description. Of course, we can always we can mess with that later, because again, this is sort of code that we're using to create something for us, right? So new item data, and we'll say the sprite will be the sprite name, and let's check these names real quick. I can turn that off right now. We can push play. So we have this underscore set up. So if we see an underscore, let's split our name to make sure that we get the correct piece, because we only want we only want the first part here. We don't want the underscore in the number. So let's do this. Let's place sprite.name and let's split it, and we'll split it according to an underscore. And so and then we'll take the first part of that. Let's see if that works. I'm not completely sure if that's going to work. We may get an exception. I'm not sure, because I'm not sure what will happen if you do this and there is no underscore. I think it should return the actual complete name, complete string, but I'm not completely sure. We'll just try it and see. So then I want to add a description, and for now this will be a generic description, and we can change it later. Let's say a perfectly good, and then we'll put this sprite name there. In addition, we will say the item dot image name equals sprite.name. The item dot say armor mod equals, let's just do something random. And is this, yeah, we want unity engine.random.range, and we'll do something from 0 to 20, I guess. Or we could do from -20. Anyway, we're just filling out some values here. No big deal. These you would fill in yourself, really, but we're just trying to get the idea across. You can actually leave them empty, so we'll leave the attack mod empty. So we're creating our item, and then the last thing we would do, we would say data.items.add, and then we would add the item. All right, and then come down here, and we want the JSON representation of that data, and we'll just call that JSON, and then we'll just do a debug.log of that JSON, and we'll see that that should save us a lot of time if it's done right. Let's go check and see what happened. So I'm gonna collapse that, and we'll push play, and we should hopefully, if there's no errors or issues, boom, yes. So there's our JSON. And if I pulled this open a lot more, you would see all the JSON there. So that worked nicely. And I think, is there a, yes, there's pretty print. So let's go ahead and make it pretty print. We can go ahead and just, I told it to pretty print there, so we can just run it, stop it, and then we can grab all of this and then go into our favorite text editor, which in my case would be Visual Studio Code, paste all of it in, except it looks like that was so much. Yeah, I didn't get it all. So perhaps if it's too big, we can't do that. So what we'll need to do is we will need to write it to a file. So in order to do that, we can say file dot write all text, and then we need a path, and let's just try this and see if this will actually work. Let's say assets / resources / JSON. Let's just write it directly into resources, see what happens. And we'll call it items.json. And the contents will be JSON. All right, let's see if that, I may have to have a more specific path, but we can do that if we need to. Let's just see. Push play. All right. Yep, it is there, right there. And as you can see, we have a full file. Let me open that up in Visual Studio Code. I'm going to drag it over, and there is our items, and you can see that it's contained within this data class that we have, and then of course the items field. And here's all our stuff, and it looks like our the image name worked, and then the splitting of that also worked. So there is a large chunk of the work done for us, and then all we would have to come down through in here is change the armor mod, the attack mod, and then of course, like I said, whatever else you wanted to put in here. But this is a nice way to create a database or a configuration file of all of your objects, especially when you have a lot. And again, you could, instead of what we did, you could go and create, instead of the item data just being a plain old class, you could make it a scriptable object, but then you would have to write an editor, and then you would have to manually do all that. Now there is also a way to, if you wanted to transform this JSON data into a scriptable object, you can do that with the JSON utility. If I remember correctly, you can say from JSON overwrite, and it overwrites JSON data in an object, and the object could be indeed a scriptable object. So that is a possibility. When we take this up next time, I might change the item data around some. I might add probably will get rid of the armor mod, and I might have like a cost instead, and then have a cost here, and do something from something to, whatever. And we'll see about making creating a list of these objects at runtime, so that we can change the JSON and we can add other items as we see fit, and just have them pop up in our game just when we change this. In other words, we could use the same amulet picture, and then we could come in here and add another one, and we could say best amulet or whatever, a better amulet, etc. So that's the idea. That's what we'll do when we pick up next time. Until then, thanks for watching.